On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.
I want to take a moment to say a few words about the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that we are debating this evening. And I say so-called, by the way, because according to the CBO and other economic organizations who have studied this bill, it will in fact have a minimal impact on inflation.
Can you understand how 87,000 new IRS agents would scare the heck out of millions of Americans?
Well, millions of Americans aren't going to be impacted by that other than getting better service from the IRS, having their telephone answered, getting the questions they need in order to comply with our tax laws. The auditing is going to be focused on those of high income, the large corporations, etc. So there's no reason to be fearful. And if you paid your taxes and if you comply with our laws...
I think the IRS is going to target the highest income Americans. As the saying goes, that's where the money is. Yeah. That's where they're going to look to collect. Yeah. The idea that there's going to be this army of IRS agents descending on the average American is just preposterous.
Do you think President Biden is the best candidate in 2024?
I'm going to be very blunt and very honest with you. My focus is totally on this November legislation, which I helped to lead. Very important.
And I'm going to ask you about that in 1 second, but your non-answer is going to likely be perceived as an intentional dodge. You won't say, yes, I support President Biden. Is that where you want it to be?
I will support President Biden.
Do you want him to run?
If he decides he wants to run, and I think his decision will be determined by how November ends for the Democratic Party.
Run again in 2024?
If he chooses to run again, I am there to support him. But my mission is to win this election in 2022. The strongest predictor of what will happen in 24 is governors across this country winning. And I intend to be that governor for the great state of Georgia.
If he called you and said, what do you think? Should I run? What would your answer be?
I'm going to tell him to do his best job, and that right now our focus has to be on what's happening. But yes, if President Biden chooses to run again, I absolutely support him.
Do you think this bill will add to inflation? Has inflation peaked? Can you say that?
You know, I really can't comment on pending legislation. It's really hard to tell. Right now, I think the most important thing, Margaret, is that inflation is too high and the labor market is strong. The global economy is struggling with ongoing high inflation, and that's what I'm focused on.
You call the bill the Inflation Reduction Act, but the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says the bill is going to have a negligible effect on inflation this year, barely any impact in 2023, between 0.1% lower and 0.1% higher. So is it really fair to call it the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yes, it is, George. This is going to reduce the costs that hit American families in their pocketbook.
I was hoping, could you address a new CBO analysis about the Inflation Reduction Act that says it would have almost no impact or a negligible impact on inflation in 2022 and 2023?
So I'll say this, leading economists have said that this Inflation Reduction Act that's been analyzed by them, that's been looked at by these economists, will indeed reduce inflation.
Is it a dismissing of the CBO, though? And is it fair? I mean, is it appropriate to brand it as the Inflation Reduction Act when it will have such a little effect in the next 2 years when people are feeling it right now?
Well, if you think about the Reduction Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, it will have an effect also. It should be called the Inflation Reduction Act because that's exactly what it's going to do. It is an anti-inflation bill that the president is grateful for, and it's historic.
Is President Biden thinking about pulling his support for the Inflation Reduction Act?
No.
Because he promised it wasn't going to raise taxes on anybody making less than $400,000 a year, but the Joint Committee on Taxation says that is not true.
Well, that is incorrect.
So the Joint Committee on Taxation, which you guys heralded as an effective body when you were selling the infrastructure package, is not to be trusted here.
I said it is not correct because I will give you why it's not correct, because it is incomplete. The JCT report that we're currently seeing is incomplete because it omits the actual benefits specific.
So Penn Wharton, where the president used to, University of Pennsylvania, he used to be a professor there. The Penn Wharton budget model says this Inflation Reduction Act is actually going to increase inflation in 2024. Does the president worry about that?
So we agree with Senator Manchin. You heard him a couple of times yesterday, and disagree with Penn Wharton. It is quite ironic that congressional Republicans are complaining or have a false outrage on this Inflation Reduction Act that is actually going to do something and help the American people lower cost when they have offered really nothing